Hi, this one is the 51st 75K tutorial, and this one was requested by AeroSoundDub, and this was a virtual Riot sound. This is the virtual Riot sound. This is what I got. Not totally the same, but listen to me right now. If you're one of the kind of people that usually just comes and easy, grab the presets and go away, you should probably stick around for this one because this one was very, very cool. And the reason why it was cool is because I got here based on information given to me directly from the man himself. I told Mr. VR that a lot of people requested sounds from his, and he said that, hey, if I wanted to do it, he would give me a breakdown of how the sounds were made. And that's what I did, and that's what happened for this one. And we'll begin from the beginning, and we will break this whole thing down. So I was given a pretty decent breakdown of information, and then after I made this, we were talking some more, and then he just gave me straight up pictures of like the actual settings of some things, which I'll show you too. But the bummer about this is that this was from a song. It's called You Know Me. It's like a year old, and he still has the project, but when he unfroze the patch, it was a Citrus patch, it defaulted to the default Citrus patch. So we don't actually have the original patch anymore. But I got enough of what was happening. I did some things differently, and some things that I knew were going to be different because I knew for some of the things I did in Pokedex, for example, were stuff that he didn't do back then. But it's pretty interesting to see the kind of the approach that I had here versus the approach that he actually used, and then the stuff we'll see that he literally did. So anyway, the list that I was given was this, and I quote: Citrus, crunchy, growly, FME sound I learned from your tutorials. So this began this business here. This guy. Not a lot going on, and it's a lot of what's happening here I was planning for, kind of like that. And I don't actually believe this is sort of what was happening. He later said that it was the usual kind of triangle-y thing that I do, and that's kind of what's happening here. I have the triangle and the high harmonic, but I also added in an extra oscillator, which is giving us a bit more of the squeeziness, and ring modulation, which is creating sharpness in the sound, which will become very important when we get to the distortion part. It's been a while since I've done something specifically like this, but if you remember, the way this works is that you control the intensity of FM by altering the volume of the modulating operator. So I am altering the FM. This is this patch right here, not by a lot. It's mostly staying kind of the same. And yeah, so what ring modulation is that it's more or less the same thing as FM, but instead of modulating the frequency, it modulates volume. And so this means that if you ring modulate an FMing oscillator, that means that it's going to be on, off, on being an FM, and off the original oscillator, just be the original oscillator, which in this case is just a sine wave. So that creates kind of sharpness, because this shape, the reason why I'm doing this half and other even thing here is that there's actually a difference between ring modulation and amplitude modulation. You might see that listed as being RM or AM. Ring modulation is called ring modulation because the original circuit that created the motion in analog hardware was in shape of a ring, which if you think about electrical engineering and the very minimum amount of it that I actually know, it makes kind of sense that that's what would happen. But the way that happens is that it's a bipolar motion. So you get a positive amplitude change and then a negative amplitude change, which does specific things, but one of the things that'll happen is that it'll essentially feel like it's coming on twice per oscillation of a period, which is not really what you want in this particular situation. Amplitude modulation is where that whole thing happens, but only on the positive oscillation. So it's a unipolar kind of experience. And so the way that we do this is that you turn on this mode here, which is it puts the whole waveform up on the top half, and then the even makes it so that it's only essentially literally one half of it is actually happening. So this is saying that essentially half the waveform is on FM and the other half of the waveform is off when it's modulating. Number one here, which I just noticed is not what I'm explaining to you. Okay, well, it's ring modulating the entire thing, and I'm altering the FM, which is altering a huge portion of the tone. So a lot of this is out of whack, but that's interesting. I initially developed the technique to do this sort of thing with ring modulating the FM oscillator but it's not that different if you just ring modulate the actual oscillator. The only difference being that if you do a lot of modulation from the original oscillator, which I'm doing because I'm doing the mod X to the mod parameter, the mod setting for input modulation, which changes the total input modulation into oscillator 1, which totals RM and FM. So that means that it's changing how much modulation is coming out of the RM. And typically I want the RM to be solid and stable, which is why I put that in a secondary oscillator, but I didn't do that. So good job me. But point being, that's sort of the effect that has. That kind of makes it sharper. Now, the note we're using, the note that was used in the original song was a pretty high note. And later in the song, actually, you can hear when it goes lower. It gets real, like, flabby. But what sounds pretty flabby right now will actually come across as being rather sharp once we do all the other stuff to it. So next step in the list says followed by Fabfilter Pro Q, Formant shaped EQ. Now, I'm not super wonderful at the whole Formant stuff just because it's not something I did a lot of. So when he said Formant shaped EQ, this is what I did. I just put a big hole and put these two peaks in here. As it turned out, that actually is pretty close to what he did, which is pretty funny. And later we'll actually show, once all this is up, how much impact this thing has on the actual sound in total. It's a little bit insane. You can kind of hear what it's doing just from doing that. And then the next up on the list is Homicide, Slight Distortion, and then Camel Crusher, Slight Distortion. I just did a thing to do some distortion. But some important stuff happens here too. So actually right this little peak here is a particular truth of what happens when you use particular angles in a wave shaper. So if I just keep it in the middle here, I'll just like this. See, as it gets as this gets close to being perfectly vertical here, higher frequencies start to come out of there. And this is kind of what the fuzz type of distortion is when you do this sort of thing. Note that as when I go higher, it gets sharper. It's like a sharper kind of distortion when I go lower, it stays at a higher kind of frequency. It's almost noise like in how it's used. So some kind of middle ground there is where you want to be. It just kind of taste in that deal. And then after that was Filterscape Q6, moving Formant EQ. Now again, not super familiar with the Formant this stuff is, but I have these 2 points, and they're doing that, which is about the extent of my actual knowledge of the Formant motion. And the only real difference between this and what VR did was that in between there, he actually put a big hole in it too. So it's actually pretty close, pretty spot on. After that, he says, Fabfilter Pro Q, cleaning up frequency spectrum peaks. I interpreted that as being that, like, because you did that, it created sort of uneven motion. So I just put a big limiter on it, which is not specifically what he was talking about. And again, we'll see what that meant when we look at the actual, his screenshots of his EQs. Just even it out. But you can see that there are kind of large peaks here. And then Fabfilter Micro, high pass filter that sweeps up and down as the sound does the octave drop down. So actually, initially, I started this up as having the note start high and just go low, which may or may not have been what happened. But it's kind of hard to tell just because in the original hit, a lot of the beginning of it got hit with the side chaining. Although there's just a teensy bit of it kind of coming in here on top of it, but you can sort of see that the harmonics are nice and straight. So it looks as if it either started up there or it went up there really fast. It's also part of what the high pass could be doing, because the high pass is actually a big part of this. And for the longest time, when I would try to do this sort of sound, this is the part that I missed. The high pass is like usually responsible for the primary tone of all of this. You get that. And then after this, followed by a Vocodex that makes everything a bit more crunchy, which, as far as descriptions go, is pretty vague. But actually, when you see the Vocodex settings that he used, that's about. It makes sense, because I did a lot of stuff in the Vocodex to kind of make this work. So you can see I got the pitch all the way down. I have the bandwidth is not super wide, and then I have the band multiplier kind of down a bit this way, so it's a bit moving around. I did turn the wet all the way up, and the sound goodizer built in all the way up, because I know I've seen VR do that on streams. I was like, okay, cool, I'll do that. orders all the way on, and then I have 100 bands, and I'm doing the thing with the band distribution where I do one of these, which is causing it to, as you can see here, I have like a reasonable looking number of bands in the mids and the lows, but then the highs have a lot more bands to them. This is a sort of a modern development in this kind of sound design. So I know that when I was doing that, I know that he didn't do that in the older sound. And then in the pitch shift, I also pushed it out even further. I also pulled this up to keep to kind of preserve some of the high end, because without this being there, the high frequencies just stop there. So a little bit of that there to kind of preserve it. And that's all that's interesting happening here, I think. I turned off all the contours, which basically just change essentially how the bleed throughs operate. And since none of them are active, it didn't do anything. I did have draft off, which would be an important thing I mentioned in a minute. And this is just here to kind of do more EQ. He also mentioned that he replaced the sub with a separate sign, and then there was a high pass at about 100 hertz. I didn't do that, but that's pretty, typical as far as like the mixing and as goes for these kinds of sounds. And a lot of you, I feel like, know that already, so I don't necessarily feel like I need to do that. And then he said that I can't stop sign there. Boop, boop, boop. So that's pretty much that. Now, let's look at what he actually did. I got pictures. Okay, so, boy, which one is this? One of these is the first one. I think this is the first one. So that's the high pass one, though. They're all high pass. Everything's high pass. This might have been it. No, great. I've lost the plot. Quickly, let me check the FB. Okay, so actually, this is the first one. So, like I said, this is actually pretty close to what my original one looks like, if make it bigger. So this is the equivalent of this EQ. You can see this big old hole, and then actually that kind of thing there. But actually, let me show you what I was talking about when I said that messing around with this alters the character such a huge amount. Kind of a big thing there. So that's pretty neat. And then the next picture is this guy, and then there's the Vocodex, but that's not the next one it showed me. This is the EQ after the 2 distortions. So this is the one. This is the EQ after the 2 distortions. So this is the essentially bringing these peaks back down to kind of make it to match it, which actually makes pretty sense, a lot of good sense, because like this one, you can see it makes big peaks and then you distort it, and then those peaks get accentuated. So then these kind of bring down the peaks to kind of even it all out, which may or may not have been solved with the way that I did the limiting, but I'm not comparing it that directly. And then after that, cool. This is the Vocodex and then EQ that comes after it. So, okay, this is the Vocodex, and then this is the EQ that comes after it. So this is the high pass at 100 hertz, and this is just EQing to fix kind of Vocodex stuff. But this is like literally all he did on the Vocodex. You can kind of see how this works out. He has the band count's pretty low, but he had the bandwidth all the way up. And this is actually pretty key because even though, the pitch is brought down a little bit, and then it's set the draft, which changes the quality a little bit, but not that much. He's also got all the time variables off, but he still has minimum times engaged, which means they're not fully actually off. But watch what happens in the Vocodex when I bring all the bands up. You can kind of hear that like it gets a little bit, it has just a particular style to it. And actually, if I had done that as he did it, which is to say that there was no other settings changed, just did that, a lot of things would just sound pretty close to what we wanted. But because of the changes I did to the pitches and the modulator, and then also the band distribution, that doesn't really work out anymore. Although some things about how the band distribution happened facilitate that kind of sound as a result. It's just that he arrived to it in a different way, albeit a much simpler way. I forgot to make the picture bigger. Here's the other one. This is the first guy, and then this is the one after the distortion, just in case you didn't see that because it was too small. And then, hold on. This was supposed to be, where was this? This was, Yerp. Okay, so this is the one, this is the moving Formant EQ. which is the thing called filterscape. And basically these 2 points are moving out up and down, which is, again, it's pretty close to what I was doing, albeit mine was not as sharp. So I was this guy. After distortion, this thing happening here. And there was another picture. That was this guy. This is the high pass with a huge like Q, which I'm doing too. Although my Q is not that huge, it's pretty. It's there. It's like, lots of options there. And yeah. And then we talk about a bunch of different things, but the thing that really separates this from sounding kind of close to the original is what I did with Citrus and what I did with Vocodex. A lot of pretty much everything else was more or less the same, and I guess that the distortion could have been a bit different too. But the FM, the original patch, contributes a lot to how this sounds. You might notice one of the things I did here is in the RM tab, I actually have the RM oscillator to be slightly off pitch. This means it moves even when we're not doing anything. Because if I let it go, it's essentially scanning through the period versus just staying static. And changing these and changing basically their phases, like I have the phase set here, they're all like, a lot of these guys are in different places. Changing these and also changing how loud they are on levels wise alters a lot of stuff. It's like this guy, if I just mess around here. If I mess around here. I might mess around here. So like a lot of impact changes the sound. Also, I'm not doing the fully the fifth octave, which may or may not matter. Depending on what he actually did. Well, actually, later he told me that what he did is that he did this, and then he added a bunch of different, like just a bunch of these to make it crunchier, which we accomplished the crunchy by having the secondary oscillator and then also ring modulating it. But then the crunchiness can also be solved just by having a bunch of harmonics in there, because that's sort of how a saw wave is made. If you think about it, a saw wave has all the harmonics on there, and because they're all layered in there together, the initial impact of all of those waveforms, even at different pitches, constructively interfere, which causes that eventually to be, the saw, direction kind of thing, which makes it snappy, makes it crunchy, makes it harsh, transient-like, I guess, and that kind of thing. So beyond all that, all the things that sort of matter the most out of all of these is this guy, to be totally honest, and the Vocodex. Basically, if you can create any kind of like sharp mess before that, you can turn that into this kind of sound. And also the high pass. The high pass is a really big part of this. In fact, the high pass is probably the main part of this. Even without the high pass, nothing doing. And this confused me for the longest time, because the way that it looks and the way that it moves, you would see it in certain analysis. It makes me think it was a bandpass the whole time. And it's super close to being a bandpass. It's in fact half a bandpass, but it's a high pass, and that's what does this. And it actually sounds a lot like old school wah pedals on like guitars and stuff like that. As it turns out, those are high passes too, which is pretty, but makes a lot of sense. That kind of thing. And the reason why this works, even though it's not moving, is that it might not be moving, but the sound is. The sound's moving around it, which makes it feel as though it's moving. And like relative to the sound, it is moving. Think about that, even when you're moving around in pitch, especially when you're moving around in pitch. In fact, when you hear this kind of sound, more often than not, you're hearing it doing this octave fall thing. Like you're hearing it moving it up around, and then the high pass moves against it, which causes, again, relative to the sound, it's all moving a lot more if it were all static. That's why you see that happening more often than not. Like if you think about your average. Well, I guess now they're doing a lot of different things, but think about your average older barely alive track and virtual Riot track. Whenever you hear this sound, it's pretty much doing that. And the same thing with the older Skrillex tracks. That's just part of that. The MIDI And the whole pitch fall thing is a big part of it. And then also, once you have this sound, you can just play it lower, and you get that. And that's what's up. Anyway, if you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. Oh, balls. If you want to make a request, please do so in the Reddit thread in the description of this video. I really should have said that at the beginning of the video, but I forgot because I'm used to saying it at the end. This FLP will be available in the description to download. This video had a lot of information. Yeah, so I am like right up at the end of the time I have before I have to go do a stream now. So I'm going to do that. Thanks for watching. And you guys, as always, have a nice day.